Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, UFC was back in Jacksonville on ABC, and that card was fire. The PFL had their final regular season event, and not without any controversy. Musk versus Zuckerberg in the octagon is being talked about, and no, I'm not on drugs, and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Gorgeous George. And with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's here in Sin City. Farah Hanoun graces us once again. She's our standout reporter in Cairo. The Boston shot caller is back. Nolan King joins us this week from Beantown. Cold Coffee's back on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. Musk versus Zuckerberg. It all started with Elon Musk responding to a Twitter user, quote, "I'm up for a cage match if he is LOL," unquote. You see, prior to that, the user had warned Musk to be mindful of what he says about the Meta boss because Mark Zuckerberg is a BJJ practitioner. Zuck, if you will, responded with, "Send me location." Habibesk, if you will. Musk fired back, "Vegas Octagon." This thing started picking up. So, of course, UFC President Dana White, he stepped in saying, quote, "This would be the biggest fight ever in history of the world, bigger than anything that's ever been done. It would break all pay-per-view records. These guys would raise hundreds of millions for charity. You don't have to be a fight fan to be interested in this fight. Everyone would want to see it." What do you think of White's eagerness to put the UFC's name behind Musk versus Zuckerberg? We go to you for the first take.
What are we doing here? I get it. It's a huge payday. People will watch, but announce it properly. If you're going to announce a fight like that, have a bag of money in one hand and twirl your mustache in the other, because that's what you do. You're being the world's biggest supervillain at that point. This is not the place for it. This is the UFC. We're going on 30 years, guys. That's 30 years of Dana White and the Fertittas trying to build this sport up. People making all kinds of jokes, finally getting it on ESPN, on bigger platforms, on Fox, and then you're going to turn around and do something like this, fresh off of the heels of saying you don't do gimmick fights. Then you're going to try and convince us that this isn't a gimmick fight, which it totally is. What do you call it, a crossover fight? It's not a crossover fight, guys. The only thing we're crossing over into is fantasy land. This fight will never, ever happen. If anything, UFC fighters going over to boxing, that is crossover. There is boxing encompassed in the training of mixed martial arts, and they're crossing over in boxing and they're testing themselves. That makes sense. I get that. But this fight here, guys, it's just going to throw away all the validity that we've tried to battle for years. Not just the Dana White and the Fertittas, us guys, we're at the forefront of this too. We're constantly getting berated by people. Your sports this, your sports that. How are we going to look them in the eye if we're putting on fights like this? It just doesn't really make sense to me. It's a glorified world star for billionaires. This is not the place for it. This is the UFC, high caliber athletes, the best in the business. Keep that in something else. That's why you have slap fight. Make them slap each other. Do that, but keep them out of the UFC. I'm not saying I won't tune in. I'm a dork just like everybody else. I'd want to see it. It's not going to be a good fight. I'll tell you that right now. It has no business being in the UFC.
Especially goes off the heels of Emmett versus Topuria, Barber versus Ribas. I mean, that's fighting. You know what I mean? And then they read this headline. All right, Farah, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get why Dana White would want to get behind this, especially that the word octagon was being used. And yes, of course, it'll be the most viewed pay-per-view fight, if we want to call it that, ever. So I get why Dana White would want to be a part of this. The only issue I have with it is him saying it's not a gimmick fight because, I mean, of course, it is a gimmick fight, if we could even call it that, because at the end of the day, I know Mark Zuckerberg does some jiu-jitsu, but Elon Musk, I don't know, Dana said that Elon said he's had fights before. I mean, yeah, that's the thing for me. It's like the UFC taking part of it, fine, but it being an actual UFC event, it would just be weird. Like it's, I don't know. The fighters seem to be happy about it. I get it. We had Dominic Cruz, George St. Pierre offered to train these guys and whatnot. So I understand why the fighters would want to get behind it, because they get exposure. And if you can throw a bunch of people, whoever is going to be a part of that card is going to get the most insane exposure ever. It's just weird for it to be in the octagon and weird for it to be dubbed as not a gimmick fight, because it's absolutely that. I just don't know. It's weird, but I totally understand why Dana would want to be a part of something like that, because obviously it would be absolutely massive.
Mm-hmm. All right. Nolan, how about you? What say you, my friend?
Well, I guess I'm sitting here twirling my mustache. I certainly get it. I mean, even if it's not your cup of tea, I think that combat sports in general has always been a bit of a circus, right? And so I kind of compare this somewhat to the boxing world recently with the influx of influencers, where there was a lot of people in the boxing community that were frustrated by this. They didn't like it. They didn't like the idea that there were two guys getting in there with gloves. But honestly, at that point in time, I was very okay with it. I thought it brought, boxing some good exposure. We see what Jake Paul does, where there's undercard fighters that get all sorts of opportunities because of this, whether it's exposure or, getting paid. So for me, I mean, I kind of look at it like combat sports has always had kind of weird fights. I know the UFC in general is not known to do that. I think Dana White is totally, come on, man. Like, this is a gimmick fight. This is, if you were to like think of a gimmick fight, what an example would be, like a far-fetched example of a gimmick fight, it would be this, right? So I don't agree with him on that, but I certainly understand why he wants to get involved in something like this. I mean, this would probably be the highest grossing, most viewed, most talked about fist fight in the history of televised pay-per-view fist fights. So with all that, and if the money does go to charity, I mean, I think this is pretty harmless across the board. If this became the brand that the UFC is, they started inserting celebrity fights into the cards, I could see, I wouldn't love that as a consumer. But at the same time, I do think that this is just so mainstream that it's a bit of an anomaly when it comes to booking these sort of celebrity fights. If it never happened, would I personally care? No, it's not my sort of like thing that I'm sitting around at a bar talking to people about who's going to win this. It's certainly not, I'm not interested in that way, but I just think this extends so far beyond what our small combat sports community would be interested in. Like it's just such a mega, two of the most famous people in the world and in this generation of human beings. So I certainly understand why somebody would want to get involved, especially with the exposure that he could get his brand, whether the money goes to charity or not. I'm sure would either A, make him look good, or B, would be good for the pockets. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll preface all this by saying, like, we don't know what the reality is for this fight either. Like, is this actually something that's going to happen? I mean, 99.9% of the time when we discuss things, or when things like this get brought up, I remember a couple of years ago, there was some brief moment where there was talk of Tom Cruise versus Justin Bieber. And I think Dana was asked about it. And then that was it. I mean, I don't think they were sitting down having contract negotiations about that fight. So is this a promotional thing? Is this something that could actually happen? Is this something that would happen under the UFC banner? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg attended a UFC event, and it seemed like they weren't even allowing, because he was there, they didn't allow anybody to be there. So would this be even something people would be able to go watch? Probably not. It would probably be only a pay-per-view thing. And so would that mean other fighters would be able to be there? Who knows? So there's a lot of questions. I almost feel kind of like this is silly to talk about at this point, because my brain instinct is like, whenever there's a fight promoter talking about something that involves people like this, I just think it's something that's never going to happen. But overall, in the scheme of combat sports things, I think that if this were to somehow materialize in the fantasy land, that I think it would be pretty harmless overall.
Okay, so let me meet you halfway, Nolan. I think I agree with you in that some of it is captivating and interesting. But come fight night, that fight's going to be awful. We all know it's going to be horrific. So does this make a mockery of the sport in a way?
I don't think it makes a mockery of the sport, because I think that they've always been doing stuff like this. I mean, we look at the earliest roots in Pride, and they loved having huge dudes go in there as sumo wrestlers and fight tiny dudes. I mean, we've seen this over time. When Jose Canseco jumped over, the UFC had CM Punk compete. Bellator's had Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie. I think it's kind of tough for me to not think that that there is an inherent, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there is an inherent circus act that comes with the combat sports world. So I think that damage is largely already done. I mean, we see people hopping over, trying to do boxing matches all the time from every, corner of the universe at this point. So I think again, the UFC. The thing is, the UFC can't claim like they never do gimmick fights. This would be this would be the ultimate. Well, you can't say you don't do that. So I mean, in that regard, I guess for people that view the UFC in that sort of a light, that they don't do this sort of stuff, or that they're not interested in this sort of stuff, or that they're beyond this sort of stuff, then yeah, I think that in that regard, it will have that effect in terms of their public image.
But at the end of the day, those guys were like athletes, right? In Pride, like, yeah, some of them are wearing luchador masks and all that. I get that. But they were athletes. In this case, these are two guys that sit behind a keyboard. And I get it. Zuck trains. I don't know what the hell Elon Musk does, but it's not to any level of being in a cage, let alone the UFC. It's just like, if you're going to do crossover, man, do Francis Ngannou and John Jones. Like, you have the power to do that.
Yeah,
Don't
cross
waste
them
time on
over.
this. Huh?
I was going to say cross Francis back over, and let's focus the energy on that, I would say, than these other two guys.
It's going to be a lot of publicity, and I get that. But guys, I want you to picture something, right? We're all watching SportsCenter at the end of that night. Anybody that's watching that, more than likely, aren't they going to be laughing more than anything?
100%. I mean, that's part of the fun. I mean, you look at the 90s, right? I believe ESPN ran a series that was celebrity boxing, and I think there were a lot of athletes on that, but I think there were a lot of people that weren't. By the way, look up Manute Bol versus William the Refrigerator Perry if you want to see something bizarre. But I almost think that this is like extends beyond that again. Like, I just think this is such an anomaly of a fight of a sparring session that it almost doesn't matter. Like, the question to begin this whole thing was Dana White's eagerness to get involved. I get it. This is going to make a lot of money for someone. Like, I think it overextends past the point that he would feel uncomfortable booking a fight like this. Again, am I going to be sitting around, with my buddies talking about this? Am I going to be really crushed if this doesn't happen? Is it even something I'm rooting for? No. But I just think overall, I view it in the span of the decisions the UFC has made, whether it's slap fight, whether it's fighter pay, whether it's all these other issues that we talk about. I don't necessarily see this as a actually harmful sort of activity.
If you have a blue check mark tomorrow, I'm going to be really mad at you.
Busted. I had one, but he took it away.
Father, what do you think this does for the exposure of MMA? You think this helps, or? Oh, are we losing connection with Fada? Okay, Goes, let me ask you that question. For example, the other day we had
to suppress their excitement,
John Gotti III versus Floyd Mayweather in boxing. They went out there, they barely boxed. They were holding. Then a big melee broke out. And then what did a lot of people say? This wasn't good for boxing. That's what I'm saying. Not that these two are going to cause all that, but in a way, their awful performance, is that just going to be not a setback? Because the sport's successful. MMA's legit. I'm not saying that. But just in terms of like, do we really, really need this? I mean, both men are so rich. If they want to give some to charity, give it already. You have more than what you could make on that particular night. So like what Nolan was saying, someone's going to make a lot of money. Yeah, the UFC. So can we blame Dana? No, because he's a promoter. But at the same time, it does contradict what Dana does try and say at times where he's trying to be so serious. He'll check a reporter, lash out a fan, cut a fighter, because this is the brand he's trying to protect. This is the sport that he built. And then, the next day he wakes up and says, let's get some pillow fights going or a slap league going. Like, I don't know. It's so bizarre to me.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Is if he had that stance from day one that, hey, we're just the UFC, we kind of do silly things from time to time, I don't think that many people really have a problem with it. But it's when he's up there and he's trying to say this sport's going to be bigger than soccer and he's comparing it to all the other sports, that's when people have a problem, because we don't see this, right? We don't see the fastest wide receiver in the NFL go, I should race Usain Bolt. Like, that just doesn't happen. Somebody checks him right away, right? So you can't play both sides. And I think that's where people have the most problem with some of these situations with Dana White, is sometimes he plays both sides. And I don't know if he does it because he thinks we're all dumb enough that we're just going to eat it all up. I guess some of us do, right? But I just think every once in a while you have to kind of bring this guy back down to reality. And reality is, at the end of the day, man, you can do something like this, but you cannot compare your league to all the other leagues if you're going to be doing stuff like this.
He does it on the heels of losing Ngannou and Jones. That's kind of what makes me the most mad.
But then he turns around and he wants to book John versus Fury. So again, I mean, I wish because he said this a number of different times, right? Where he said we don't do gimmick fights, or we don't, we're interested about putting the best athletes, the best fights together in the world, blah blah blah. I don't know why like CM Punk never gets brought up in that conversation. You know what I mean? Like that's something to me that was like, well, you did that, and I would be interested to hear what his answer was. But I mean, let's face it. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a promoter and he's Dana White, and says this sort of stuff. I mean, it shouldn't come as a shock to us that he would contradict himself even in the same press conference. I mean, I think the time that he went off about the gimmick fight about Francis and Fury, like 10 minutes later, he was talking about the BMF title, and it's like, it's a bit of a token. I think that's a harm to me. The BMF title, I see some people don't like it. To me, that's a harmless thing. You know what I mean? It's like a side show, sports to be fun, whatever. So I don't mean to like dump on it, but at the same time, you can't say it's not a gimmick. I think gimmick's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, you can't say that that's not a gimmick. You can't say Musk versus Zuckerberg's not a gimmick. I think they're way more gimmicky than Fury versus Jones or Fury versus Ngannou. That's more of an actual, maybe it's a half gimmick. Maybe there's a bit of a gimmick in there that it's boxing versus MMA, but it's still a fight. It's not a gimmick fight. It's a gimmick to sell a fight. So yeah, I definitely think he loses all credibility when it comes to that. But who knows? Again, I mean, do we actually think this thing's going to happen? I would say probably not.
Father, let's go to you for the last word on this topic. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, apologize for that connection issue. Yeah, I mean, it's what Nolan said, because we've seen, like, when discussing things like Ngannou and Fury or whatever, we're saying like, Fury comes into the octagon, he'd get absolutely destroyed, and they should come to boxing and whatnot. So when we're saying things like that, and then we're talking about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk obviously has zero experience in any form of combat. It's just what it's pretty crazy to think what could come out of it. But again, like I said, I understand why Dana and the fighters would be excited about something like that, but it definitely is a gimmick fight.
Before we turn the page there, I do want to encourage the chat to participate. You can ask a question or leave a comment. We'll take the best ones and incorporate it into the show. Nolan, this is for you from Me Diamond 44. How can Nolan say it's an anomaly and then acknowledge that it's become a regular thing in boxing?
No. I'm saying it's an anomaly of two of the most famous people in the world fighting. I'm not saying it's an anomaly in terms of like two guys that don't have boxing experience selling a fight based on their fame, or an MMA fight. I'm saying, I think this, having two of the most famous people on earth fight, I think even though Dana has over time said that he doesn't do this sort of thing, I wonder which promoter would turn down the opportunity to book Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, to book, I don't know who else you could put on these level of international fame. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I was saying. Like, the anomaly is how big these two people are that are seemingly want to get into a fist fight, allegedly.
Got it. All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic here, because some great fights took place this weekend. Ilia Topuria versus Josh Emmett was one for the ages, even though the judges' scorecards were all over the place and in total favor of Topuria. The fight was still a barn burner, at least in my book. All right, what did this fight do for Topuria? Did he, in fact, earn himself a title shot versus the winner of Volkanovski and Rodriguez? Fada, what say you?
Yeah, listen, I've been high on Ilia Topuria for a while. I mean, Topuria is a guy who came out as a very strong grappler, as a submission threat. He was submitting everybody, was a bantamweight, fought for the Cage Warriors title, won the fight, but wasn't eligible to become champion because he missed weight. He comes into the UFC on short notice and fights Yusuf Zalal. He had a big weight cut, ends up using his grappling, couldn't submit Zalal. I don't know how Zalal got out of some of those incredible like anaconda chokes and stuff like that, but had an impressive showing nonetheless. But the most impressive thing about Ilia has been his evolution, because I covered his final fight before he got signed to the UFC, November 2019 in Bahrain. Guram Kutateladze also fought on that card, and he scored an overhand right knockout first round, and that was the first time he finishes a fight with strikes. And from then on, he's just kind of been on a tear. Like I said, he wasn't able to finish Zalal, but we've seen what he's done in the octagon up until the Josh Emmett fight. And I actually think going 5 rounds is the best thing that could have possibly happened to Ilia, because I do think he's ready for a title shot, especially if you look at the landscape of 145 pounds. We've had Max on top for so long, and then Volkanovski being the guy to dethrone him, and then Max is sitting, knocking off contenders, even beat Yair Rodriguez, who's fighting Alexander Volkanovski for the title, who's now the interim champion. So I think Ilia is a fresh blood for the division. I think the win over Josh Emmett, 50-42 on one of the judges' scorecards. He looked phenomenal. He's well-rounded, and most importantly, he showed that he could go 5 hard rounds. Like I said, I think this is the best thing that could have happened to him. A finish is great, but you don't want to know what it's like to go into those championship rounds when you're fighting for the title. The fact that he got that experience, because this guy throws heavy leather. He was fighting a guy in Josh Emmett who throws heavy leather, but so does he. I mean, if you remember his fight against Bryce Mitchell, he was swinging and lunging. He even tripped because of how hard he's throwing those right hooks. So the fact that he can go those hard 25 minutes while mixing in his grappling, I think is the best thing that could have happened to him. It was a great performance. All the credit to Josh Emmett for being so unbelievably tough. But yes, I think Ilia Topuria, especially when you look at the landscape at 45, should absolutely sit out and wait for the winner. Especially, again, Volkanovski and Yair are fighting very, very soon. So absolutely wait and fight the winner, maybe the end of the year, depending who's ready and when they're ready.
All right, next is Nolan. Nolan, please, your thoughts. Did he earn himself a shot? And I'm going to give you another one. Does the UFC have a new star on their hands?
Yeah, I think I would have to say yes to both those questions. And it's crazy because I think we all kind of knew he was on this trajectory, or he was maybe moving in the right direction to kind of emerge as this top guy. But I didn't necessarily think coming into this fight that I wasn't ruling it out that was a possibility, but it wasn't on the forefront of my brain. It wasn't, this is Ilia Topuria's moment to really solidify himself as the next title challenger for Volkanovski versus Yair, the winner of that. Really solidify himself as a star. I kind of viewed this as a really good, top contender fight where the guy that won this would probably set themselves up for some sort of title eliminator. Especially Topuria. Maybe Josh would even have to fight one more just because he lost the interim fight. So it was just kind of the title picture wasn't necessarily on my brain. It wasn't the obvious storyline to me coming into this, but man, he went out there and he put on about as dominant of a performance as you can without getting a finish, which I think, to me, I know a lot of people like the quick finishes. That's why we tune in to see the Jorge Masvidal flying knee against Ben Askren. But I think there's something to be said about when you put together a 25-minute performance where you show that there's no question that you are better in pretty much all facets than somebody else that has fought for an interim title. I think that's about as big of a statement as you can make. And then you add in the fact that, he's representing some places that don't necessarily have a ton of representation in the UFC, between Georgia, between Spain. I believe he was born in Germany too. So the guy's could be an international star. I know he had some big names in the soccer world or the football world come out. You guys could probably tell me more about that. But man, I thought that was Ilia Topuria's night. That will be the card that I think people look back on when they think about his emergence as a title challenger, or even could go on to be a champion someday. But I am very excited about the prospects of him versus Alexander Volkanovski, and I do not think he should have to fight again, Topuria, before he gets that shot.
That was longtime center back for Real Madrid and Spain. His name is Sergio Ramos. And that's big name. Yeah, Topuria's lucky, man. When the European soccer tournament goes, he's got like three teams he can root for, because he does represent all those countries. But guess what? They all back him. I think that's pretty cool. And he's making a push for the UFC to go to Spain. When is that going to happen? That has to happen. There are some countries in Europe that would love to host the UFC, and this is the perfect guy to go back with when it comes to España. All right, Goes, how about you? And Goes, maybe give me an opinion here. I know we discussed this on Junkie Radio, and Pada and Nolan, if we want to come back to you on this one, please, let me know. But Goes, the fight, did he earn a title shot? And also, what did you think of Emmett coming out for the 5th round? Was that necessary? He was pretty beat up, and like Pada stated, the judges' scores, I mean, they avalanched towards Topuria. To his credit, he did come out like a bat out of hell in the 5th round, but still, could there have been a stoppage either in between rounds or maybe during that 5th round itself? Saved the guy. He was messed up, dude. That eye was closed. The announcers, they have a cage side seat. They were saying the same stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, first and foremost, Josh Emmett, that's a bad man. He's no pushover. So to have a performance like that for Topuria over a guy like Josh Emmett is so impressive. As far as what the corner could have done, I mean, I was kind of in that boat where at the end of round 4, I was saying I kind of hope he doesn't get off the stool, but I would understand as a corner why you would do that. You know your fighter best. You know he kind of proved that he came out and he did start throwing right away. He does have fight in him, but I have to disagree to a certain extent. Like I've heard a lot of people say, well, what about Leon Edwards, right? What Leon Edwards was able to do. To me, that's a little different because Leon Edwards was just discouraged. He was losing the fight, but Josh Emmett was beat down. I mean, he had one eye closed. Just at any point in your day, guys, try and walk around your house with one eye closed, or even if you drive for 2 seconds and you wink or you close your eye, like it's a different world, let alone fight. That's a little different. So I think at times we do have to protect these fighters, but you only have seconds to really make that decision. And I think cornermen are always going to lean on the side that my guy can do this. You know, we prepared for this. He can make it happen. So I don't really fault them for doing that, but I was more on the side of let's keep him out of that situation. As far as Topuria goes, the sky's the limit. You know, I agree a lot with what Nolan said, a lot with what Farah said. I do think 5 rounds was very important for his game. I think that's going to help him out. But at the same time, he kind of quietly snuck up into this position, but at the same time didn't. And what I mean by that is you have to look at Alexander Volkanovski and what he's done in the last few years. For a small period of time, we kind of felt like he was somewhat treading water a little bit in the sense that once he gets past these big fights, there's not really that next crop waiting for him. When he went and he took that fight at 155, I think that's where guys like Yair Rodriguez, Ilia Topuria have crept up and now become these guys that we feel like have a decent shot against Alexander Volkanovski. It breathes life into 145 again, and I love that. Is Topuria ready for a shot? Yes, I think he is. But I will say this, at the rate that this guy keeps improving from fight to fight, I think another fight would actually give him even a better chance at fighting Volkanovski. Because don't forget, man, yes, Topuria looked great, but Volkanovski has been an absolute monster, and you have to be at the top of your game to face that guy. So could he benefit from another fight? I do, but I don't think the UFC would risk that. I don't think they would do that. I think it looks like he would be next for whoever comes out of Rodriguez and Volkanovski.
Okay, I got some comments from the chat, but Pada or Nolan, did you want to weigh in anymore on what I was talking about, the Emmett part, or anything else?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in with something that Goes just said. Like, we saw what happened with Arnold Allen. He was on an amazing winning streak, and Max Holloway ended up snapping that winning streak, and he didn't get to fight for the title. We saw that with Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira. So for someone like Volkanovski, who I've spoken to multiple times throughout the years, he's always about show me something. That's what Alexander Volkanovski's been about in the featherweight division. He kind of got sick and tired of fighting Max so many times. He was upset about people commenting about the rematch, thinking he lost. Went on to put a dominant performance in the trilogy. I love Max. I think he's phenomenal, but do you really want to risk? I mean, he mentioned I'd fight Max if it was in Spain, but do you want to risk knocking off these fresh contenders for Alexander Volkanovski and have him go up to lightweight? And all of a sudden people are complaining about Islam, like, oh, he's only defended his belt once against the featherweight and whatnot. Well, we wouldn't, you know what I mean? So it's like there are names for Alexander Volkanovski, and he's game to fight anybody. And if there was any kind of performance that Topuria could have put outside of a finish, it was this. So I think, especially timeline-wise, it makes sense for him to fight. And I just want to address a comment from D Life saying Ilia should be fighting at 135. Ilia is a pretty small 45er, but don't forget, I mentioned it earlier, he fought for the Cage Warriors bantamweight title, and he missed weight by 4.5 pounds. And that's when he moved back up to featherweight. He tried bantamweight twice, I believe, in his career. So clearly he has a hard time making 35.
Okay. I have some comments here from the chat. Inglorious Fishing says, Topuria is very powerful and a very well-rounded fighter. I think he will go far personally. Another one here, JD Realty, YT, Ilia will be champion. I think he's next. He's showing consistent improvements and is very talented. Lots of power and IQ and cardio improving. Future champion. Keep it coming, folks. And hey, here's another thing. Hit the like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and it'll also make you more aware of everything that we provide for you guys on a daily basis. That little bell, by the way, will tell you when we're on live. We're live every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with myself and Goes and members of the MMA Junkie panel. Also, Nolan wants to share something apparently.
No, I was just showing people where the subscribe button was.
Got it. Yeah, because I'm looking at StreamYard. I'm like, he's pointing at the mute button. Maybe he's telling me to shut up and go on to the next topic. So anyway, I will do that. Let's go on to the next topic here. 2023 PFL 6, that's what they call it. I have to say it that way. It also took place this past weekend. This was the final regular season for the lightweights and welterweights. The event ended with some great knockouts in the main and co-main events. OAM's vicious knee was nice. Sadabusi's beautiful wheel kick. Hopefully you guys saw it. It was money. However, earlier in the night, Natan Schulte and Schulte-Manfio put on a performance that play-by-play announcer Sean O'Connell described as a quote-unquote ATT sparring session. The next day, PFL pulled the winner of the matchup, Schulte, from the playoffs and installed the fifth-place finisher, Shane Burgos. Their statement read, quote, "The actions were taken because the fighters did not meet the standards, which all PFL fighters agree to uphold in competition," end quote. Guys, are you on board with the PFL's decision? Fair or foul? Nolan, let's go to you.
I think it's a foul, to be honest with you. Initially when this press release came out to, where they announced that they were going to suspend them both and take Schulte out of the playoffs, I kind of was like, well, they didn't, it did seem like a weird fight, and it obviously there was something going on there. The guys were uncomfortable. But the more I thought about it, man, the more I just kind of realized that this is pretty wrong. I think it's way too subjective. I mean, for you to come in, kind of the big thing about PFL that makes them different, right, is the fact that they say it's kind of an even playing field. Everybody comes into a season. You can be not the biggest name, but if you score the amount of points, you're going to win your way to become a champion. So I think they kind of expose themselves as still having pretty ingrained matchmaker subjective decisions that go into this. I mean, we don't know how the regular season matchups are picked. To me, it seems like that they are done similarly to the way that the UFC is. And now it seems like they have just taken it upon themselves to decide that a performance wasn't up to par, that it doesn't count for 3 points, that it counts for 0 instead. And this is a fight that they made. So for me, unless you have a fight that's you think somebody threw the fight, you think there was some sort of collusion going on that way, that they had an agreement that somebody was going to win, that it was fixed, I don't think that this is the appropriate approach at all. I mean, if you had a guy go in there, right, and I believe it was Tyson Chartier, the coach from the New England Cartel, he posted in Instagram comments, he was saying, what if somebody coasted the third round? They weren't trying. If you're claiming these guys aren't trying, is somebody that goes in there and coasts because they think they're winning, does that count as not trying? Does that disqualify them from points? And I think that's where the issue is. Like, this is just a very subjective decision. It's very unfair, in my opinion. 2 guys went out there. One guy lost his, didn't get a second check because he put on a bad performance. And I just think it's the punches you got to roll with as a promoter. I mean, the UFC, you don't see the UFC saying, we're not going to count Derek Lewis and Francis because the effort wasn't there. I mean, it's just silly to me. Like, I just think it's wrong. I don't think that they necessarily did it because it put Shane Burgos in the playoffs, but I think the optics of that are not great, that the big free agent signing that wasn't going to make the playoffs is the one that gets in now. I just don't like the whole thing. I think if I was a PFL fighter, it would kind of bug me a bit. And certainly if I was one of these 2 guys involved, it would disturb me. And if you look at the PFL rules and regulations, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because again, they have all these rules, all these league format ways and rules and regulations about how things are going to work, but a lot of them have clauses that's like, we have the best 4 fighters from the playoffs make it, and then there's another rule the best 4 fighters from each division make it to the playoffs, and then there's another rule saying that quarterfinal matchups can be changed anytime by the promotion. It just seems like there's a big asterisk throughout this rule book of fairness. So for me, I wouldn't have done it. I think it was a bad move. I think it was bad PR, and I just think it was the wrong call overall.
All right, before we go to Fada with the next take, and Nolan, I'll give you another chance to weigh in if you feel differently, although I think you might actually not need it. But anyway, here's Natan Schulte, talking about this incident post-fight.
I not deserve to the fight against him, like in the first round I was not nervous, but I was try to fight, but this is very different to training and to fight. We did 200 sparring sessions, but this is not like fight like for everybody, you know. This is very weird. But I was not nervous, but I was trying to fight, you know. I feel bad, you know. This is like weird. This is like very weird. Like the people's like watch the fights, they like don't know how hard is fights against like a friend or like a brother, you know. This is really really hard. Maybe I like we have like like in the playoffs, okay, we can change, but in this situation, brother, this is weird, you know. I was talking to him, I was talking to my coach about this fight, but today I'm not happy, you know. Not for the fight, but I'm not happy for the situation.
Hada, what say you?
I mean, listen, as Nolan just tweeted recently, the athletic commission didn't suspend them beyond the medical suspension. So it's definitely foul in my opinion. I know it was a dud. We've seen a few duds. Nolan mentioned Ngannou, Lewis, Rose Namajunas, and Carlos Esparza. It happens. I mean, these guys didn't want to fight each other. They have a lot of respect for each other. It's kind of understandable why the fight would pan out like that. They've like Schulte just said, they've sparred God knows how many rounds together. They know each other's games. It could be a matter of respecting or over respecting each other's games just because they both know each other very well. So I definitely think it's foul, and I think it's unfair for Schulte to be removed from the tournament, not make the playoffs, and be replaced by Shane Burgos. Because, I mean, define it didn't meet the standards. You know what I mean? I think that's the blurry line here. Where it didn't meet the standards because it was a dud. Because you guys believe that they threw who threw the fight? Like, why would, do you get what I mean? Like, it's a blurry line. You can't say they didn't meet the standards because it's not a clear statement. Didn't meet the standards because it was a dud of a fight. Like I said, we've seen many fights that weren't that entertaining throughout the years in MMA. So definitely think it's foul. Definitely think it's very unfair for Nathan Schulte, and just not a very good look, in my opinion, for the PFL.
I understand what you guys are saying, but in those cases, Lewis and Ngannou don't have any form of a relationship, like being neighbors or friends or godfathers or anything like that. I don't remember the fight vividly. I know it had very little action, but Otto, one thing that bothered me here was, I mean, I don't think there was even one power punch. There was a couple kicks to the body, so that's why I think Sean O'Connell referred to it as a glorified sparring session. And that's why I also take issue with what Natan's saying. Like, for those at home, well, look, the three guys commentating, they were not feeling the fight either. They've been in that cage, you know, or octagon or whatever. People bet on this. People paid money to come see fights. Not maybe specifically these two, but still, I don't know. It did kind of bother me, but you two are convincing me that maybe you live with the consequences and adjust accordingly in following seasons. Joseph Boza in the chat is saying they were trying to do everything they could to get Shane Burgos in the semifinals. I don't know if that's the case. I just think they're really pissed off with the performance from these two, and they elected to make a statement about it.
But then it goes back to, how could you prove any of this, right? They're all theories. That's my point. Like, you can't prove that anyone was doing anything on purpose. These two guys, yes, they didn't want to fight each other. Maybe some people are not shocked that the fight panned out that way. But then again, like I said, it could have just been a matter of respecting each other's skill set so much. Again, that's a theory I'm making. We can't prove any of this, is my point. So to go ahead and take such harsh action is just, it's foul in my opinion.
And the thing is, too, for me, is like, I understand that obviously that the relationship between the two of them seemed to halt them both a bit or make them a little bit tentative. But to me, there's a number of different things that guys go through when it comes to mental obstacles when they get in there, whether it's a guy, they think, you know, they think their opponent's dangerous. Maybe they're dealing with an injury. Maybe, you know, like something like this where they've had past training relationships, whether they were good or bad. Like, there's a certain amount of things that are obstacles that these guys, when they get into a fight, need to get over. I mean, I view this as something, an obstacle that the promotion caused for both of these guys by booking this fight, and then are now punishing them on top of it because they didn't react to it in a way that provided an exciting fight. But unless it's fixed, like Fervor said, which the commission, no suspension, no overturning of the fight, doesn't seem like there's any investigation. They just kind of like, yeah, the promotion just did this. then that's the body that's supposed to be investigating whether or not fights are fixed or not. And so this is an official fight by their standards. So I think that anything else has to be a foul.
Goes, you want to weigh in?
Yeah. So here's the thing, guys. If you're going to make a call like this, you have to be 100% sure you know what's actually happening here. You need everybody to go back and watch this fight and agree with your take, because it's a really big stance to take to kind of do that to these fighters. Because if you're wrong, you open up Pandora's box, right? And not only is the PFL battling this particular situation, but they're also battling, of course, the criticism that's going to come with, well, what about your free agent signing? It's kind of weird that now all of a sudden he's in the mix when he wasn't. But you know what? You guys are going to hate me, but I actually agree with this decision. I think it was fair. I always side on the side of the fighters, and it takes a lot to get me to go the other way. But yesterday I sat down and I watched this fight 2 times, maybe even 3. And I was watching it strike for strike. And to call it a glorified sparring session is giving it too much credit. It was awful. I mean, they were not throwing hardly any power punches. I think George alluded to a body kick. That's about all I saw that had some real starch behind it. The punches were going at their hands. There was a lot of grappling. And even then, there weren't situations where either guy was really going for anything. The fact that the corners aren't, there's the rule that they're not going to say anything. It was just too weird all the way around, guys. And it's hard to say, hey, these guys went out and did something like that. But I'll tell you what, if they did, they're terrible actors, because even at the 10-second mark, like, do something that makes you feel like either guy is trying to win the fight. And you could tell off of their emotions, the way they were acting the whole time. It was just weird. And this is kind of one of the only instances where you'll have an entire crew that's calling the fight that's made up of fighters, right? There's not a John Anik in there. These are 3 guys that have been in that cage before. And from the get-go, they were tearing these guys apart. They had no idea what to say. And even when they went to Dan Hardy, like, he had problems even talking about what it was he was watching. So it was really bad. I would say anybody that's watching this right now, go back and just watch the fight. It's terrible. It really is. And PFL was in a really tough situation. And maybe Farah and Nolan have swayed me a little bit in the sense where I could say, well, maybe you just kind of let this go and address it at the end of the season. That I can maybe lean with a little bit, but I honestly don't have a problem with this. It was that bad.
But I guess, where would the line be? Where would
That's
the line be where you would cross it? Because to me, I feel like I would have to have some evidence as a promoter that there was something sneaky or shady. Because who's to say? We've seen really awful fights before.
Didn't Schulte kind of incriminate himself, though? Didn't Schulte kind of incriminate himself and say that?
I mean, he said it felt weird. I would assume
they were holding back or kind of allude to it. Not specifically.
We've heard this from other fighters before as the reason why they don't want to fight is because they think once they get in there, they're not going to be comfortable punching somebody that's their friend in the face. So for somebody to be in there and living that and saying, I'm uncomfortable punching my friend in the face, I think is pretty much what would be expected.
Mm-hmm.
So let me play devil's advocate here. And I don't want to belabor it like, oh, I'm on Team PFL, but this is what a lot of people are saying, and it's kind of what I'm thinking. They say if it was playoffs, if it was for more money, yeah, I guess we all say that. Give me $2 million, all that Tyson knocked me out. Okay, if it's worth it, right? But at the same time, this is their job. That was the matchup. If they had the concern, why not say it beforehand, put it back on the PFL to maybe decide, do we rebook them in a different way or something? Or the PFL then says, sorry, this is it, and then they have to decide something. But I don't know. It just looked awful, honestly. And I don't think it's a representation of either guy. Both guys are former champions. You know what I mean? Merab Dvalishvili said, I don't want to fight Aljo so much that I'll just go to 125. Aljo has said, I don't want to fight Merab so much that I'm even entertaining going to 145. That and the weight cuts are getting tough, but they've come to a meeting of the minds and figured out ways to really not have to fight each other. So I don't know. Once it's out there for the public to consume, to give us that, I just thought it was a terrible look. But Goes is right. You guys did make a good point. deal with it at the end of the season, learn from it. But as far as the rules were, they went out there and did their thing. They didn't throw the fight. Although I did tell Goes, both guys had such poor effort, but Roush had like really, really a poor effort, almost like they had flipped the coin and decided, well, of the two, you'll be the one, I guess, that advances. And I hate saying that because it borders on me saying that it's a fight fix, right? Which is a terrible thing to say. I realize that, but at the same time, I don't want to be a hypocrite and say stuff that goes, and then say, "Oh, I don't have the cojones to come out here and say what I felt that night," and the next day when we watched it over and over.
I think there's a simple solution to all this. You know, as journalists, we always want to look for evidence. We'll do a case study. Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg undercard, George Garcia versus Brian Garcia, the long-awaited, many years in the making fight. We'll figure it out, and then we'll do some psychoanalysis on you. We'll have some of our experts jump in, and we'll put this to the test.
Hey, we're not the Lozon brothers over here, but I'll tell you one thing, man. There'll be a finish in that fight because at that point, I think Goes and I will just collide, and whatever happens, happens. You know what I mean? But we're not going to sit there and do the salsa and the tango and all these other things.
Or how about, like, they could have made Schulte and Manfio rematch if they didn't like that fight so much. Then why not make them run things back and force them to fight again? And then they know what the circumstances would have been and see what will come out of it. I think that probably would have been a better solution than to do this. I don't know if that would have been feasible, but I just
all right,
maybe
okay.
Yeah.
You guys do me a favor. Promise me this. Go back and watch it one more time, but watch it like nothing going on. I'm telling you, I didn't want to be on this side. I definitely didn't want to be on this side, but they left me no choice. I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
And even what Schulte was saying was, once he was in there, he realized that bullshit from second number one, they weren't fighting. The most I saw was a stiff jab. You know what I mean? But any form of power was not coming, or if it was nowhere close. So Roush had some nice kicks to the body, and again, these are two former champions that know what it takes to get there. It may be that you have to collide with a teammate, and the wrestlers of the world will tell you, hey, ask any wrestler. No wrestler is going to be feeling these two guys, because the wrestlers of the world tell you, I'm trying to take one of my best buddies, my training partner, out so that I can wrestle that weekend and rep the team. You just crush each other's dreams all the time. So I just think this could have been spoken up beforehand, and they had to realize one would. I mean, they didn't realize that one would get pulled eventually, but they had to realize, well, one of us is not going to advance to the playoffs. So at that point, why even punch each other? I guess
I kind of liked Olivier Aubin-Mercier after the fight, before this suspension thing came out. He had kind of pitched like PFL should only allow one fighter per division per gym, which I know might cause some issues. Like, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, think of a division they have two of their mainstays in. They're in the same division or something. But honestly, if that's going to be a concern, if PFL is going to do this, if that's what their policy, they want to be able to enforce this going forward, I think not the worst idea I've ever heard,
I think maybe the only issue is maybe Extreme Couture, because that seems to house like so many fighters. So probably that and ATT. Yeah, that and ATT. But yeah, I don't know. I'll probably go rewatch the fight again. Granted, I fall asleep with the majority of fights since they're in the middle of the night for me. So unless a commentator screams, sometimes that will wake me up. But I'll go back and watch it. But I just think, I don't know, it's weird. Like the reaction it garnered out of people should say enough. Like, if you just go through Twitter or just get the general, like, just analysts, fighters, or whatever, the general reaction to it was it was outrage. So I think that should say enough.
Who needs melatonin when you have Schulte-Manfio versus Nathan Schulte,
We're running behind, so we're going to be really, really tip-top for these last two. Macy Barber versus Amanda Ribas. That's all I got to say. The fight was nonstop from beginning to end. Had a Hagler-Hearns feel to it. Yeah, I said it. Guys, react to what you saw, and what does this fight do for the future? Did you guys see what I just did there? All right, Goes, you go first.
The fight had it all, man. They struck on the feet. It hit the ground. There was blood back and forth. I thought Macy looked amazing in this fight, and her striking has never looked crisper than this. I want to give Amanda Ribas her credit. She hung in there. She took some shots. She recovered. She even dished out some on her own. I wouldn't hang my head too low for this fight because I just feel like it was Macy Barber's night, no matter what, no matter who was in front of her. But what I do like is her stock going forward, right? I think she is in a good position. I think she does kind of how we were talking about with Volkanovski. Now there's people there, regardless of who comes out of this fight, the championship fight. I think Macy Barber would make a very interesting challenger to one of them.
Fada, I know you stayed awake for this one. What'd you think of this one?
I was actually in the middle of a basketball tournament during this one, so I had to go back and watch that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people had an issue with this being the co-main event, so I was happy that they got to show out like that. I don't think Ribas' stock went down at all. And if in fact, I think it went up after that fight. It was an amazing fight. It was back and forth. It had a bit of everything. They were going for the finish at all costs. And Barber's received quite a bit of criticism recently. You're outspoken. The likes of Mohamed Mokaev, Ian Machado, Gary, the guys that want to say Edmund Shabazians, I want to be the youngest champion. They put a target on their back, and then anytime they fall or have a close fight, people are all over them. Macy Barber went through that, and now she's kind of shown an evolution and maturity. She's only 25 years old, and I think she looked fantastic, showed a killer instinct, and definitely a very exciting addition to the upper echelon of the flyweight division as she climbs the ranks. So, and I liked what she said in the post-fight speech. I'm here to, send a message to the division, show it's not like she screamed necessarily title shot. She does want her rematch with Alexa Grasso, but she did allude to wanting to, go through the top contenders and get there. So I think all in all, it kind of made Barber regain some of that momentum that she had when she started out her UFC career.
All right, Nolan, what's the future hold for the future? Do you see a title fight for her in the future?
I do. I think I'm very impressed with her recently, even the last couple of fights before this, not just for her performances in the cage, but the way that she's presented herself outside too. It's like, I don't want to say a different person than the fighter we saw come into the UFC and proclaim that she was going to be the youngest champion ever. But she seems just overall, listening to her at the press conferences, hearing her pre and post fight interviews, seeing some of the things that she says, I think she's come a long way. I think maybe suffering those losses were the best thing that ever happened to her. She's matured both in the cage, she's matured outside of the cage, and she seems like she's putting it all together. That was a great fight. It was exactly what she needed to grow her stock even more. I think people are maybe even people were hard on her, right? When she started to lose, it was easy to dance on the grave of the youngster that came in and was brash and was confident and everything like that. But I think she's starting to win people back a little bit. I mean, she continues to put on performances like that, which are fun. She continues to say the right things on the mic afterwards. And I think she's going to have some of those fans come onto her side. So good for her. I think she's on pace for a title fight. Maybe one more, we'll get her there.
I salute both ladies, man. Both Amanda Ribas and Macy Barber. They put one on for the ages. I hope both of them took their show and win bonus and even a discretionary. That's what fighting's all about. Both ladies were leaking, but they still kept throwing hard at each other. They grappled. They got up. They showed a lot of, courage. Man, it was really, really one of the best fights I've seen this year. And in women's MMA, this one was solid. All right, topic 5. Every once in a while, I just love getting surprised by the UFC matchmakers, especially when something comes out of left field. You hear about two names linked to each other, and sometimes you just have to go, what? That's how I felt about the fight announcement. Frances Manon-Fiorot, did I do that okay, Pop? She's going to welcome Rose Namajunas to Paris and the flyweight division in September. Do you like this booking for Thug Rose? How does this affect the division? Pada, it's on you.
Well, it wasn't completely left field for me because I did interview Manon a few months ago and she mentioned something to do with Rose flyweight. And at that point, I was like, what is she talking about? I had to go back and research. Obviously, I do miss things here and there. And I'm like, when did Rose ever say that? So clearly she knew something that nobody else knew. And here we are. She got the fight that she wanted. It's interesting. It's different. The only issue I have is that now Aaron Blanchfield and Tyler Santos on the other end, who gets the title shot from this, I guess it's who comes out the most impressive. But it's definitely an interesting booking. I mean, Rose, a 2-time strawweight champion. She holds 2 wins over the current champion, Zhang Weili, but we were just talking about duds of fights. She had obviously quite a lackluster performance against Carlos Esparza. interesting that that's the move that she makes, because she does hold a bit of power at 115, considering that she holds the 2 wins over Zhang Weili. But yeah, a little bit risky in my opinion, I'm going to say as well, because Manon is ranked number 1. I understand why Manon would want to fight like that. Rose has the name and everything. She is on the cusp of a title shot, and I think beating Rose could give her that, even though Rose is a new entry to the division. But Manon is strong. She's as strong of a 25er as you can get. She's strong. She comes from a judo background, is an active striker. It's a tough fight for Rose. But again, I feel like a lot of people are writing Rose off because it's recency bias, and I saw the reaction when that fight was announced. A lot of people seem to be forgetting what Rose Namajunas has done, the amazing moments she's delivered at 115 pounds. So I think it's going to be an exciting fight. I know Manon is going to bring the fight to her, and we're going to see the best of Rose Namajunas as well. As we see in the clip here, I do think Manon is going to mix in some of that judo background. She's still physically strong. So is Erin Blanchfield on the other side of the bracket. Tyler Santos showed off her amazing grappling. So the upper echelon of flyweight is looking very good right now. I just think it only wasn't out of left field just because I spoke to Manon a few months ago. Otherwise, yes, it is kind of a random matchup. It's an interesting one. And hey, I mean, Rose beats Manon. Manon is ranked number 1. Title shot could be hers. I mean, she's got the name, former strawweight champion. So interesting addition to flyweight for sure.
Mulata Weingart, he's going to be rooting for Thug Rose. Joseph Boza says, I like the booking. It could turn the division upside. If Rose wins, JD Realty YT says, Rose could show out against Manon. Can't wait to see Rose get back on track. Sky V's and El Daddy says, interesting fight, but seems like Grasso has started a trend at flyweight. All right, next up is Nolan. Nolan, what do you think of the fight booking? How does this affect the division? Do you like this for Thug Rose yourself?
It certainly gives them a number of different options now. Like Faris said, you're essentially going to have what it appears to be kind of an open field of who's the next contender. And it might be a good thing because, let's face it, I mean, if Valentina Shevchenko goes out and she beats Alexa Grasso coming up here, chances are you're probably going to get a trilogy fight, which would extend this whole, storyline even longer for the contenders. But I like the move for Rose. I think it's always nice to shake things up. And my understanding was that they were initially hoping to do Manon Fiorot versus Erin Blanchfield in Paris, and then they kind of pivoted when Rose finally gave them a direction of which weight class she wanted to be in. So to me, that kind of speaks to a number of different things. But one is the fact that I think that Rose has a lot of weight here. The UFC holds her in high regard. There is something to be said about being a former champion, moving a weight class, and having that sort of name recognition. So to me, coming into this, if you had Blanchfield, Talia Santos, and Manon Fiorot, I would say that Erin Blanchfield was probably the one that would just need one more to get there. But now when you bring Rose Namajunas into the mix, it doesn't only help her in terms of her name recognition and getting a title shot, but I also think it helps Manon Fiorot as well. Like if she goes out there, beats a former champion in the name in Paris, which the environment's probably going to be electric for her there, I think she's probably going to have the edge on whoever wins Blanchfield versus Santos. So I guess, again, it comes down to the performances and who looks the best in those two fights, which are a week apart. But I love the booking. I think it's a perfect perfect move for Rose Namajunas.
Goes, you know what I need from me. Wrap this up.
All right. Well, look, when you've been doing this as long as Rose Namajunas has at this level, there are no easy fights. Yes, the matchup feels right, but it is very, very dangerous. Manon is a little bit bigger, has a little bit longer reach. She, as Farah said, like she's going to push that pace from beginning to end. It's going to have Rose on her heels. So she's going to have to work on her explosion, her pace. It's probably going to be a really good fight, though. I mean, Manon has some great skins on her wall, and adding a Rose Namajunas to this, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm all in on this matchup.
Goes yielded 30 seconds. Swada, you wanted to weigh in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say in the comment section, Joseph Boza corrected me. I forgot Valentina losing to Alexa makes her number 1. So Manon is number 2 right now. But yeah, she was at one point number 1. But yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting for me. Rose moving up, even though she's got 2 wins over the current strawweight champ, seemed a little bizarre. And then the other day, Tatiana Suarez, who has beaten Grasso, decides to go back to strawweight. And I thought, well, maybe why not ride out flyweight for now and then go back? But she wants it she wants to go in another direction. But man, that flyweight division is popping. All right. Thank you to you three. You guys did an excellent job covering the biggest news for the week here in the sport of mixed martial arts. And of course, we go deeper on it on the website, MMAJunkie.com. 5-time winners of the World MMA Awards Best Media Source. We have a free app for all smartphones and tablets. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button, please, if you don't mind. Hit that bell as well so you're notified of when we're on live. Again, it's youtube.com/MMA Junkie video, or just go straight to the site. All the links are provided there. And big shout out to the comment section. You guys came strong. We'll see you next week, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, for another edition of the Spinning Back Clique. Go out and be a champion.